In today's video, we're going to deep dive into the gym myths that have plagued the fitness world for years. We are going to be breaking our myths up into fat loss myths and muscle building myths. Kicking off with our fat loss myths, myth 1 is that we can lose body fat from one specific area. The main thought process is usually being able to work a specific part of the body and subsequently lose more fat in that area. For example, doing crunches to lose belly fat. Unfortunately, this just isn't the case. Instead, think about fat loss being like the water in this pool. If I wanted to drain the water and started by using the bucket on the deep end, it wouldn't drain from just that side. The pool would drain equally from all sides, and that's how body fat works. When we lose body fat, it comes equally from all areas of the body. Now, if we go back to our pool, when that water does start to drain, the deep end would be the last place to go because it had the most water to start with. Again, back to body fat, those stubborn areas, those are the areas that had the most fat storage to start with, so will always be the last to go. Myth 2 is that you must be doing cardio for fat loss. Developing your aerobic system is beneficial for pretty much everyone from strongman to marathon runner. However, using it as your sole tool for fat loss will see you running around in circles, literally, as usually fat loss is the least interesting benefit you'll see. Attempting to just burn more and more calories will run you into the ground. Now, an equally as common myth is that fasted cardio, or cardio before you've eaten, is more beneficial for fat loss. Interestingly, this actually has some merit, but maybe not in the way that you're thinking. This 2011 study did note that during fasted cardio, fat was being utilized more as fuel when compared to a fed cardio group who utilized more carbohydrates as fuel. However, over a 24-hour period, the fasted cardio group then went on to burn more carbohydrates later on that evening, and the fed group went on to burn more fat later on that evening, simply meaning that both groups equaled out over 24 hours. The key takeaway here is that there doesn't seem to be any difference between fasted and fed cardio when thinking about fat loss as a long-term event and not something that happens session by session. So if you happen to enjoy fasted cardio, then feel free to continue to do it, but if you're doing it for fat loss benefits, there does not seem to be any evidence to support this. Myth number 3, carbs make you fat. The old wives' tale that carbs are the cause of all weight gain. This has to be one of the most long-standing myths out there. And in all honesty, I can actually see why it may be so prominent, especially in the old generation. The reason for this is when we consume carbohydrates, our body then stores some of those carbs as glycogen. Now, for every 1 gram of glycogen that we store, we also store around 3 grams of water. What this means is that when your carbs intake increases, you may see a sudden jump up in your scale weight. And because a sudden increase in scale weight is always associated with gaining fat, it's then kind of obvious to see that someone might associate the increase of carbs with a lot of fat gain. But of course, this just isn't the case. Gaining fat is a process that happens over weeks and not day to day. Myth 4 is that there is a superior diet for fat loss. The world of dieting is littered with all sorts of diet claiming to be the new fat loss giant, usually being pushed, funnily enough, by someone that is selling a product related to the diet.
I'm going to teach you an intermittent fasting strategy that I've been doing for 10 years consistently.
It's a strange coincidence. We're going to stick to the 2 most common diets, which is the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting. Keto is where you massively reduce carbohydrates and increase fat in the attempt to reach a state of ketosis where your body's primary fuel source is fat as opposed to carbohydrates. Keto dieters will likely see a massive decrease in body weight in the first few weeks of dieting because, like we mentioned, carbohydrates increases water retention. They're also promised that their body will finally use their stubborn body fat as fuel. Finally, the magic pill. During keto, your body will actually be running on fat, but unfortunately, it is dietary fat, i.e. the fat you are consuming, and not body fat. Sorry about that. On the other hand, you've got people claiming that intermittent fasting is the promised land where fat loss is instantaneous. This is basically where people only consume calories in a set amount of time during the day. Now, there is definitely research to show that intermittent fasting is effective for fat loss. However, when calories are matched, there is no difference between the two. Maybe all is not lost because personally, I think it might have a small benefit. People usually start fasting around 6 or 7 p.m. and that tends to be the time when you sneak over to the cupboard and the chocolate biscuits come out. So restricting those times to 0 calories may stop some unnecessary calories coming into your diet as long as you don't consume them earlier in the day. Myth 5 is that you must cut out all junk food. This one plagues my day-to-day with people thinking that they're not going to lose fat unless they're eating boiled chicken and rice. Your perfect meal plan for fat loss are the meals that you already eat, just in different quantities to match a specific calorie goal. I generally recommend either a 70-30 or 80-20 split of whole foods and processed foods. Cutting out food is only going to lead to a bad relationship down the line. Now then, fat loss myths out the way, we are now moving over to muscle building myths. Myth 1 is the anabolic window. This is the theory that if you don't consume some protein 13.675 minutes after a workout, you may as well have just stayed in bed. This boils down to an attempt to restore muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. In reality, this window has been proven to be several hours or even up to 24 hours long. If you've already consumed a high protein meal a few hours before your workout, this will be fine to see you through to your next meal. However, if you've been fasting for an extended period of time before a workout, it would be recommended to get some protein within the next few hours. Myth 2 is muscle confusion. You have to change your exercises up so your body doesn't get used to them. Confuse the muscle, bro. This might be the only one that gets me a little bit like... Let's start off by saying when you're doing a bicep curl, your body doesn't know that you're doing a bicep curl. Your body simply responds to the stress that is being placed on that muscle. The only two things that actually matter are mechanical tension and progressive overload. Now, I have a full video on those two linked up here. The key takeaway is that our bodies adapt to the stresses that are being placed on them during an exercise, which means it's actually highly beneficial not to confuse a muscle and instead provide the muscle with significant tension alongside small progressions in intensity each week to promote muscle growth. Myth number 3 is muscle activation. You've likely heard or been told that you need to do activation exercises before your main lifts to make sure your muscles are fired up. This likely boils down to either being able to feel the target muscle during an exercise or to activate an inactive muscle. In my opinion, this myth simply stems from chasing the feeling of contracting a muscle. Yes, of course, it's important to feel the muscle you're trying to work. However, the mind-muscle principle is highly overrated when it comes to muscle growth. The sensation you feel will be far different when you're training a muscle in a fully lengthened position as opposed to a fully shortened position. A fully shortened position provides that almost cramping feeling in the muscle, whereas training a muscle in a lengthened position just won't feel like that, and that's fine. So instead of wasting hours doing pointless activation exercises, spend that time actually doing the exercise that targets that muscle, making sure your setup is perfect and you are pushing the target muscle to failure. Myth 4 is that you need to spend hours in the gym. Training for muscle growth demands that you are training to or close to failure. We know that for sure. Alongside that comes fatigue. It reaches a point in just trying to do more where we run into something called junk volume, which simply put are sets which just don't provide sufficient tension and therefore don't provide sufficient stimulus for muscle growth. This simply reinforces that training intensity matters, and the longer you spend in the gym, the lower your intensity is going to be. 2 sets taken to muscular failure will far surpass 4 or 5 sets with 5 reps in the tank, regardless of the rep range. I'm going to quickly note that muscular failure, i.e. the target muscle failing in the exercise, is very different from systemic failure, which is basically just failing due to your conditioning. And finally, myth 5, heavier weight equals more muscle growth. I've previously mentioned muscle growth will boil down to mechanical tension and progressive overload. This means that the specific weight you're using actually has very little to do with muscle growth when sufficient tension is met. The difference in weight used will occur from person to person. What allows me to hit failure within 8 reps will be different to what allows you to hit failure in 8 reps. This doesn't mean that because my weight's heavier, I'll be gaining more muscle or vice versa. The problem arises when the weight is too heavy and form simply starts to break down. So the main priority for all lifters is to pick a weight that allows you to fail within the 6 to 12 rep range with near perfect form. Keep your sets within a 0 to 3 rep range away from failure and aim to make the smallest possible progressions each week. And I guarantee you will see muscle growth in the long run. And that will do it for today. They have been my 10 gym myths that need to go in the bin. If you have any other gym myths or something you just like debunked, please leave it below in the comments or drop me a message and I will make a part 2 on this video. Thank you guys so much for the support on the channel over the last few weeks. It's been pretty crazy. But yeah, I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much.